For 3 years, I've watched my brother Caleb smirk every time money comes up in conversation. 3 years of him generously offering to help me with my rent while I sit on enough real estate investments to buy his entire neighborhood. 3 years of family dinners where he talks about his successful marketing firm while I quietly own the building his office rents space in. They see what I want them to see, a struggling 28-year-old woman working odd jobs, living in a modest apartment, driving a beat-up Honda Civic. What they don't see is the property empire I've built in the shadows, the luxury penthouse I actually live in across town, or the fact that their failure of a daughter just bought the family estate they're all fighting over. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Zoe Winters, and if you met my family, you'd think I was the black sheep who never quite figured life out. While my older brother Caleb drives his BMW to his corner office and talks about his latest client acquisitions, I show up to family gatherings in thrift store clothes and deflect questions about my various freelance projects. It's a performance I've perfected over years of being underestimated, and frankly, I've grown to love the power that comes with being invisible. The call that started everything came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was reviewing acquisition reports for my latest commercial property purchase when my mother's voice cut through the silence of my real apartment. Not the studio I let them think I live in, but the 3,000 square foot penthouse overlooking the harbor that I bought with cash last year. "Zoe, honey, we need to talk about the house," Mom said, her voice carrying that particular weight that comes with family crises. "Your father and we can't keep up with the maintenance anymore. The property taxes alone are killing us, and with the foundation issues Uncle Frank discovered." The house, our childhood home, where 4 generations of Winters had lived, loved, and built memories. A sprawling Victorian mansion on 12 acres of waterfront property that had been in our family since 1892. The place where Caleb and I had spent summers running through endless rooms and secret passages, where Christmas mornings happened around a fireplace you could park a car in, where our grandmother had taught us both to make her famous apple pie in a kitchen bigger than most people's entire apartments. "How much are you thinking of asking?" I said, already knowing I'd buy it regardless of the price. "Well, Caleb thinks we should list it for $2.8 million. The location alone is worth that, even with the repairs needed. But honestly, sweetheart, I'm not sure we have any other choice. The foundation work alone is going to cost $400,000, and that's just the beginning." $2.8 million. I'd bid more than that in profit just last month from a single commercial development deal. But to my family, that number might as well have been $28 million. To them, I was the daughter who asked to borrow gas money and shopped in the clearance section at Target. "What does Caleb think about all this?" I asked, though I already knew. Caleb always had opinions about everything, especially when it came to family finances and what everyone else should do with their money. "Oh, you know your brother. He's got it all figured out. Says we should sell to the highest bidder, take the money, and buy something smaller. He's probably right, but..." She paused, and I could hear the heartbreak in her voice. "It's just hard to let go of everything we've built here." That evening, Caleb called me directly. I was in my home office reviewing contracts for a $15 million mixed-use development project when his name flashed on my phone screen. "Hey, little sister," he said, using the condescending tone he'd perfected since we were kids. "Mom told me she talked to you about the house situation." "Yeah, it's really sad. I know how much that place means to everyone." "Well, it's just reality, Zoe. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions when you're dealing with real money. I know $2.8 million probably sounds like an impossible amount to you, but in today's market, it's actually quite reasonable for a property like that." There it was, the subtle dig wrapped in fake concern that Caleb had made into an art form. The implication that I couldn't possibly understand real money or make decisions about significant financial matters. I've been thinking, I said carefully, what if someone in the family bought it? Kept it in the Winters name.
The laugh that came through the phone was everything I'd expected and worse. Not just amusement, but the kind of patronizing chuckle you'd give a child who suggested they could fly to the moon.
Zoe, come on, be realistic. Who in our family has almost $3 million just lying around? I mean, I'm doing well, but not buy a mansion in cash well. And you, he paused, probably trying to find a nice way to say what he really thought. You're still figuring things out, right? Last time we talked, you were doing some kind of freelance writing thing? Actually, I was thinking I could buy it. The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough for me to count to 7. Then came the laugh again, longer this time, with a breathless quality that suggested he found my statement genuinely hilarious. Zoe, I love your optimism, I really do. But sweetie, do you have any idea what kind of down payment alone would be required for a mortgage on a property like that? We're talking about more money than most people make in several years. And that's assuming you could even qualify for a loan, which, no offense, but your credit situation and employment history? He didn't need to finish. In his mind, I was the sister who couldn't afford a car payment, let alone a multi-million-dollar estate. I was thinking more like a cash purchase, I said quietly. This time, the silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Caleb finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of concern and barely contained irritation. Zoe, are you feeling okay? I mean, I know you've been under a lot of stress lately with work and everything, but you're talking about buying a $2.8 million house with cash. Do you understand how completely unrealistic that sounds? I understand how it sounds to you. How it sounds to anyone with a basic grasp of reality. Look, I get it. You love that house as much as I do. We all do. But love doesn't pay for foundation repairs, property taxes, or the dozens of other things that place needs. You can't just wish yourself into being wealthy enough to save the family home. I could hear Meredith, his wife, in the background asking what was wrong. Caleb covered the phone briefly, and I caught fragments of his explanation. Zoe thinks she can buy the house. No, seriously. I don't know, maybe she's having some kind of breakdown. When he came back on the line, his voice had shifted into the patient tone adults use with confused children. Listen, sis, I think maybe you should talk to someone, a financial counselor, or maybe just someone who can help you work through whatever's going on. Because this fantasy about buying the estate, it's just not healthy. It's not based in reality. What if it is based in reality, Caleb? Then I'll eat my hat. Actually, no. If you can prove to me that you have $2.8 million in cash sitting around ready to buy that house, I'll eat my entire wardrobe, because that's about as likely as me sprouting wings and flying to Mars. After he hung up, I sat in my penthouse office looking out at the city lights reflecting off the harbor and smiled. Tomorrow was Saturday. The family gathering Mom had mentioned, the one where they'd all sit around the dining room table in that very house, discussing its fate like mourners at a funeral. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. Sterling, it's Zoe. I need you to prepare some documents for me and cancel my weekend plans. I have a family reunion to attend.
Growing up as the youngest Winters child meant growing up in Caleb's shadow. That's the simple truth I've carried for 28 years, like a pebble in my shoe that I learned to walk around until it stopped bothering me. He was the golden child from day one, valedictorian, star athlete, homecoming king, early admission to Northwestern. I was the quiet one who preferred books to parties and spent more time exploring the hidden passages in our old house than socializing with kids my age. The Winters family had always been comfortable, but never wealthy. Dad owned a small chain of hardware stores, and Mom taught elementary school for 37 years. They built a good life through hard work and careful saving, but they measured success in steady paychecks and reliable health insurance, not investment portfolios or luxury purchases. The family estate had been passed down through generations, each one doing just enough maintenance to keep it standing for the next. Caleb fit perfectly into their vision of success. Business degree, corporate job, wife with a teaching credential, two-story house in a good neighborhood with a two-car garage, and a lawn that looked like something from a magazine. He checked every box of what they thought prosperity should look like. I, on the other hand, had always been the question mark. In high school, while Caleb was student body president, I was the kid who spent lunch periods in the library reading real estate investment guides I'd ordered online with my babysitting money. While he was playing varsity football, I was teaching myself about property values and market analysis through YouTube videos and free online courses. Zoe's just different, I'd overheard Mom tell Aunt Joyce once when I was 16. She's smart, don't get me wrong, but she doesn't seem interested in the things other kids her age care about. Sometimes I worry she's too much of a dreamer. Dreamer. That was the family code word for impractical, for someone whose head was in the clouds instead of planted firmly on the ground where responsible people kept their heads. What they didn't understand was that my dreams came with spreadsheets and carefully calculated risk assessments. The turning point came during my senior year of high school. Caleb was already established in his corporate job, married to Meredith, and playing the role of successful big brother to perfection. I was getting ready to start college with a partial scholarship and a work-study program, majoring in business with a focus on real estate development. That's when the Henderson place went up for sale. The Henderson property was a small rental house 3 blocks from our family estate, built in the 1960s and showing every year of its age. Mrs. Henderson had passed away, and her children wanted to sell quickly so they could split the inheritance and move on with their lives. The asking price was $89,000, which might as well have been $89 million to an 18-year-old girl whose biggest financial achievement was saving $3,200 from 3 years of part-time jobs. But I'd been studying that house for months. I knew the neighborhood, knew the rental market, knew exactly what it could be worth with the right improvements. The bones were good, the location was perfect, and the price was about $20,000 below market value because the family wanted a quick sale. I spent 2 weeks putting together a business plan that would have impressed MBA students. Market analysis, renovation budget, projected rental income, 5-year financial projections. I calculated everything down to the cost of cabinet hardware and the monthly return on investment. Then I did something that would define the rest of my relationship with my family. I asked my parents for help. "You want to do what?" Dad had asked when I spread my carefully prepared presentation across the kitchen table. He was still in his work clothes, looking tired after a long day at the store, and my business plan probably looked like homework he didn't have time to check. "I want to buy the Henderson house," I repeated, "as an investment property. Look at these numbers. With a small down payment and owner financing, I could have it paid off in 7 years while generating positive cash flow from day one." Mom and Dad exchanged the look that parents share when their child has suggested something that sounds simultaneously impressive and impossible. Caleb, who'd stopped by for dinner, leaned back in his chair with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Zoe, sweetie," Mom said gently, "buying a house is a huge responsibility. You're about to start college. Don't you think you should focus on your studies?" "This could help pay for college," I explained, pointing to my projections. "The rental income would cover the mortgage payments plus give me about $300 a month in profit. By the time I graduate, I'd have built significant equity and have experience in property management."
It's a nice dream, Caleb interjected, but do you have any idea what's involved in being a landlord? Dealing with tenants, maintenance issues, legal requirements, and what happens when you can't find renters, or they stop paying, or the roof needs replacing? He wasn't wrong about the challenges, but he wasn't asking because he wanted to help me solve them. He was poking holes because he couldn't imagine his little sister succeeding at something he'd never attempted himself. "I've researched all of that," I said, pulling out additional folders. "I have contingency plans for vacancy periods, a budget for maintenance and repairs, and I've already talked to 3 potential tenants who would be interested at the rental rate I'm projecting." Dad picked up my financial projections and studied them with the careful attention he usually reserved for his store's quarterly reports. For a moment, I thought I might actually convince them.
"The numbers look good, kiddo," he said finally, "but $18,000 for a down payment? That's a lot of money, more than your mother and I have in savings right now. What about a loan from the family? I could pay you back with interest, give you a better return than your savings account." That's when Caleb really stepped in. "Zoe, I think you're getting ahead of yourself here. Real estate investment isn't a game. People lose their shirts doing this stuff. Mom and Dad worked too hard for their money to risk it on a teenager's fantasy." Fantasy. There was that word again. The one they used whenever I suggested something that didn't fit their narrow definition of what an 18-year-old girl should be thinking about. "Besides," he continued, "you're about to start college. Shouldn't you be thinking about things like choosing a major and making friends, not playing house with rental properties?" Playing house. As if my carefully researched investment strategy was just an elaborate game of make-believe. The conversation ended the way most of my ambitious proposals ended in those days, with gentle discouragement wrapped in loving concern. They thought they were protecting me from making a mistake. What they were actually doing was teaching me that if I wanted to build something real, I'd have to do it without their help or approval. 3 months later, Mrs. Henderson's children sold the house to a local investor for $95,000. 6 months after that, I watched him rent it out for exactly the amount I'd projected in my business plan. 2 years later, he sold it for $140,000 after making minimal improvements. That missed opportunity cost me about $51,000 in profit and taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Other people's lack of vision doesn't have to limit your success. It just means you have to be more creative about finding your own path. By the time I started college, I'd already decided that the next time I saw an opportunity, I wouldn't be asking permission to take it. College was where everything changed, though my family never knew it. While they saw me struggling with student loans and work-study jobs, eating ramen noodles and shopping at thrift stores, I was actually building the foundation of what would become a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. The key was learning to operate in the shadows, to make moves so quietly that no one suspected the girl they pitied for her financial struggles was actually accumulating wealth faster than most of their successful friends. My freshman year at State University, I lived in the cheapest dorm available and worked 3 part-time jobs: tutoring math, cleaning office buildings at night, and doing data entry for a local property management company. That last job was pure gold, even though it paid minimum wage. While my supervisor thought I was just another college kid grateful for any work, I was actually getting a masterclass in real estate investment from the inside. I had access to rental applications, lease agreements, maintenance costs, and most importantly, vacancy rates and profit margins for over 200 properties. I spent my lunch breaks analyzing which neighborhoods had the best rent-to-purchase price ratios, which property types generated the most consistent income, and which landlords were making the most money with the least effort. By spring semester, I'd identified my target: student housing near campus. The numbers were beautiful in their simplicity. Buy a small house within walking distance of the university, rented to students by the room instead of as a whole unit, and triple your monthly income compared to traditional rental strategies. The demand was constant, the tenant turnover was predictable, and the profit margins were substantial enough to justify the additional management headaches. The problem was still the same one I'd faced with the Henderson property. I needed capital, and my family had already made their position clear on that subject. That's when I met Professor Williams during office hours for my Introduction to Finance class. I'd been asking questions that went far beyond the course material, diving into topics like leveraged buyouts and creative financing strategies that wouldn't be covered until senior-level courses. After class one day, he asked me to stay behind. "Miss Winters," he said, organizing his papers with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent decades explaining complex concepts to 18-year-olds. "I'm curious about your interest in advanced financial strategies. Are you considering a career in investment banking?" "Real estate investment, actually. I'm working for a property management company, and I'm trying to understand how to get started as an investor without significant initial capital." He smiled, and I could see the gears turning in his head. "Have you heard of owner financing arrangements or lease option strategies?" I hadn't, but I was about to get an education that no college course could provide. Professor Williams, it turned out, had spent 15 years working in commercial real estate before transitioning to academia. He'd seen every creative financing structure imaginable, and more importantly, he understood that traditional lending wasn't always the answer for young investors with more vision than assets. The key, he explained over coffee that afternoon, was finding motivated sellers who cared more about regular payments than getting all their money up front. Recent divorce, job relocation, inherited property they don't want to manage. There are dozens of reasons why someone might prefer a guaranteed monthly income over a lump sum payment. He introduced me to concepts like wraparound mortgages, subject to purchases, and seller carryback financing. Strategies that would allow me to acquire properties with little or no money down, assuming the existing mortgage payments and giving the seller a monthly payment on top of that. Of course, he warned, these arrangements require absolute integrity and careful legal documentation. One missed payment or legal mistake can destroy your reputation and your future in this business. Over the next 6 months, Professor Williams became my unofficial mentor, teaching me to analyze deals, structure creative offers, and most importantly, present myself as a serious investor despite my age and apparent lack of resources.
My first deal came in March of my sophomore year, a small duplex 4 blocks from campus owned by an elderly couple who'd been trying to sell for 8 months without success. The husband had early-stage dementia, and his wife was overwhelmed trying to manage the property while caring for him. They owed $67,000 on the mortgage and were asking $89,000, but they were desperate for a solution that would give them monthly income without the headaches of being landlords. I offered them exactly what they needed. I would take over their mortgage payments, $548 per month, and pay them an additional $200 monthly for 15 years. No bank loans, no closing costs for them, no real estate commissions. Just a simple agreement that solved their problem while giving me a property that would generate $1,400 per month in rental income. The negotiation took 3 weeks and required lawyer visits that cost me most of my savings. But when I walked out of that law office with the deed, I felt like I'd just climbed Mount Everest. At 19 years old, I owned my first investment property. The duplex exceeded my projections from day one. I rented each unit to pairs of students, charging $700 per unit instead of trying to find families who wanted to rent a duplex. My monthly expenses were $748, $548 for the original mortgage, plus $200 to the sellers, and my monthly income was $1,400. After setting aside money for maintenance and vacancy reserves, I was clearing about $500 per month in profit. More importantly, I was learning. Every month brought new challenges: a broken water heater, a lease violation, a tenant who wanted to paint their bedroom black. Each problem taught me something about property management, and each solution made me more confident about scaling the operation. My family, meanwhile, had no idea what I was doing. When they asked about my part-time jobs, I mentioned the data entry work, but not the property management duties I'd taken on for my own rental. When they worried about my finances, I let them think my careful spending was due to necessity rather than choice. When Caleb offered to help me apply for additional student loans, I thanked him for his concern and changed the subject. The deception wasn't malicious, it was protective. I'd learned from the Henderson House incident that my family's love came with limitations. They wanted me to succeed, but only within the boundaries of what they considered appropriate for someone my age and gender. Real estate investment fell outside those boundaries, so I simply stopped discussing my real ambitions with them. By the end of my sophomore year, I was already scouting my second property. The duplex had given me proof of concept, and more importantly, actual rental income that I could show to potential seller financiers as evidence that I was a reliable buyer. Professor Williams helped me structure increasingly sophisticated deals, and I was learning to think like a business owner rather than a student who happened to own a rental property. The foundation was laid, now it was time to build an empire.
The moment that changed everything happened during spring break of my junior year. I was back home for the week, sitting around the family dinner table, listening to Caleb hold court about his latest promotion at the marketing firm. He'd just been made senior account manager and was regaling everyone with stories about his corporate success, complete with details about his new company car and the client retreat he'd be attending in Hawaii. "It's all about building relationships," he was saying, cutting into his steak with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "You have to understand that business is really just people trusting people. When clients see that you're successful, that you drive the right car and live in the right neighborhood, they know they can trust you with their investments." I was half listening, mentally calculating the numbers on a 4-unit apartment building I'd been analyzing, when Mom turned to me with that particular expression she wore when she was trying to include me in conversations about success. "Speaking of investments, Zoe, how are your classes going? Are you still thinking about that business degree?" "Actually," I said, setting down my fork, "I've been doing some real estate investing. Remember that duplex I mentioned? I've expanded into a few more properties." The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before a thunderstorm hits. Caleb stopped mid-chew, Dad looked confused, and Mom's face went through a series of expressions that suggested she was trying to process information that didn't compute with her understanding of reality. "What do you mean, expanded?" Caleb asked slowly. "I own 4 rental properties now. The duplex was just the beginning. I've been using creative financing strategies to acquire undervalued properties near campus and converting them into student housing." It was Meredith who asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "How could you possibly afford 4 properties? Are you still working part-time jobs to pay for college?" I should have lied. I should have minimized, deflected, made it sound smaller than it was. Instead, I made the mistake of trusting my family with the truth. "I'm actually making about $3,200 a month in rental income after expenses," I said. "The properties are cash flowing well enough that I've been able to reinvest the profits into additional acquisitions. Next month, I'm closing on a small apartment complex that should add another $2,800 to my monthly income." The explosion was immediate and devastating. "Are you insane?" Caleb's voice carried a pitch I'd never heard before, somewhere between outrage and panic. "Do you have any idea what kind of legal liability you're exposing yourself to? What happens when one of your tenants gets hurt? What happens when the market crashes? You're going to lose everything and probably drag the family down with you." "Caleb, calm down," Dad said, but his voice carried concern rather than confidence. "Zoe, sweetheart, this sounds very risky. Are you sure you understand what you're getting into?" "I've been doing this for 2 years. I've studied every aspect of the business, I carry proper insurance, and I have legal counsel for all my contracts." "Legal counsel?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "Zoe, how much money are we talking about here? How much debt have you taken on?" Before I could answer, Caleb was on his feet, pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. She's gotten in over her head with some get-rich-quick scheme, and now she thinks she's a real estate mogul. Do you know how many people lose their shirts doing this stuff?" "I'm not losing anything," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Every property is profitable. Every acquisition has been carefully analyzed and—" "Stop," Caleb held up his hand like a traffic cop. "Just stop. You're 20 years old, Zoe. You have no business experience, no credit history worth mentioning, and apparently no concept of risk management. Whatever you think you've accomplished, it's built on luck and borrowed time." That's when he said the thing that would define our relationship for the next 8 years. "You know what's going to happen. You're going to crash and burn. And when you do, you're going to come crying to the family to bail you out. Well, I'm saying right now, publicly, that I won't be part of it. I won't watch you drag Mom and Dad's retirement savings down with your fantasies." The room went quiet. Dad was staring at his plate. Mom looked like she might cry, And Meredith was studying her hands like they contained the secrets of the universe. "I would never ask you for money," I said quietly.
Sure you wouldn't. Not now when you think you're the next Donald Trump. But when reality hits, when the tenants stop paying and the repairs start piling up and the bank comes calling, you'll be at our door with your hand out just like every other failed entrepreneur who thought they were smarter than the market. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Not just the accusation, but the certainty in his voice. He wasn't worried about my success. He was counting on my failure. More than that, he was looking forward to it. "Caleb, that's enough," Mom said, but her heart wasn't in it. "No, it's not enough. Someone needs to tell her the truth before she ruins her life. Real estate investment isn't a game, and it's not something you learn from YouTube videos and library books. It takes capital, experience, and connections that she doesn't have." He turned to face me directly, and I could see something in his eyes that I'd never noticed before. Not just condescension, but actual hostility. As if my success, even the possibility of my success, was somehow a personal threat to him. "You want my advice? Sell whatever you think you own, pay off whatever debt you've accumulated, and focus on getting a degree in something practical. Find a nice job with a steady paycheck and leave the big business decisions to people who actually know what they're doing." I looked around the table at my family, the people who were supposed to support my dreams and celebrate my achievements, and saw only worry, disappointment, and doubt. They didn't see a successful young entrepreneur who'd built something impressive despite her age and circumstances. They saw a reckless child playing with fire, destined to get burned. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom with its faded wallpaper and participation trophies, I made a decision that would shape the next decade of my life. If my family couldn't handle the truth about my success, then I simply wouldn't share it with them. I would continue building my empire, but I would do it in complete secrecy. Let them think I was struggling. Let them worry about my finances and offer unwanted advice about my career choices. When I succeeded, and I would succeed, it would be on my own terms, without their approval and without their involvement. The next morning, I drove back to college in my beat-up Honda Civic, past 3 properties I owned that my family would never know about. By the time I graduated 2 years later, my real estate portfolio would be worth over $800,000, generating enough monthly income to buy Caleb's house in cash without touching my principal. But as far as my family knew, I was still the struggling college student who needed their concern and their pity. And I intended to keep it that way until the moment was right to show them exactly who I'd become.
The Saturday morning of the family gathering arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel like a fresh start. I sat in my actual apartment, the penthouse they'd never seen, drinking coffee from a mug that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, watching the sunrise paint the harbor in shades of gold and amber. In 3 hours, I would drive across town in my beat-up Honda Civic, the car I kept specifically for family occasions, and walk into the house I'd secretly purchased 2 days earlier. The irony was delicious. While my family spent the week agonizing over losing their ancestral home, I'd been working with Sterling to structure the purchase through one of my shell companies. The sellers, a luxury development firm that had planned to tear down the house and build condominiums, had been surprisingly easy to negotiate with once I offered them a 15% premium over asking price for a quick, all-cash close. My phone buzzed with a text from my property manager. Harborview Apartments closed successfully, $2.3 million purchase price, projected annual return 18%. Congratulations on property number 47. Property number 47. I owned 47 income-producing properties across 3 states with a portfolio value approaching $28 million, and my family still thought I was the daughter who needed help with her electric bill. I chose my outfit carefully for the gathering. jeans with strategically placed holes, a sweater I'd actually bought at a thrift store during college, and worn sneakers that suggested someone who couldn't afford to replace them. The costume was important because today would be the last day I'd ever wear it. The drive to the family estate took me through neighborhoods where I owned rental properties my relatives would never suspect. Past the 4-unit building where Caleb's friend from college rented an apartment without knowing his landlord was the sister Caleb constantly worried about. Past the small office complex where 3 local businesses paid me rent every month while I maintained my cover as a struggling freelancer. Pulling into the circular driveway of the Winters family estate felt surreal, knowing that I now held the deed to every square inch of the property. The foundation issues Uncle Frank had discovered were real, but they were also fixable with about $150,000 in repairs, pocket change compared to what I'd made in the last quarter alone. The house looked exactly like it had during my childhood. Imposing, elegant, slightly worn around the edges, but still magnificent. 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, 2 kitchens, and enough history to fill a dozen family reunion stories. The wraparound porch where I'd spent summer evenings reading real estate investment books while my family thought I was just enjoying the sunset. Mom greeted me at the front door with a hug that carried the weight of genuine worry. At 62, she still moved with the energy of someone who'd spent decades chasing after elementary school students. But I could see new lines around her eyes that spoke to the stress of potentially losing the family home. "Zoe, sweetheart, I'm so glad you could make it. Your father's in the library with Uncle Frank, going over the inspection reports again. Caleb's in the kitchen with Meredith, making his famous breakfast burritos." His famous breakfast burritos. Everything was famous or award-winning or somehow exceptional when it came to Caleb's accomplishments, even his weekend cooking. I found Dad and Uncle Frank hunched over a stack of papers in the library, surrounded by the kind of masculine furniture that suggested important decisions were made in this room. The inspection reports were spread across the massive oak desk like evidence in a criminal trial. "There she is," Uncle Frank said, looking up with a tired smile of someone who'd been delivering bad news all morning. "Your father's been showing me these estimates for the foundation work. It's worse than we initially thought." Dad gestured to the papers with the resigned expression of someone who'd spent the week watching his inheritance evaporate. "Frank's contractor says it could be as much as $600,000 to do it right. That's on top of the roof repairs, the electrical updates, and God knows what else they'll find once they start digging." "At least $800,000, answered Frank. "Maybe closer to $1 million if they find structural issues with the rest of the foundation." I nodded sympathetically while mentally calculating that the repairs would increase the property value by at least $1.5 million, making the investment ridiculously profitable, even at twice the estimated cost. "It's heartbreaking," I said, which was true, though not for the reasons they thought.
In the kitchen, Caleb was holding court while cooking, explaining the real estate market to anyone within earshot. He wore an apron that read "World's Greatest Dad" and moved around the kitchen with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. "The thing people don't understand about property values," he was saying to Cousin Daniel, "is that location only matters if you can afford the maintenance. A house like this, in this condition, it's basically a money pit waiting to happen." Meredith looked up from her coffee when I entered. "Zoe, I was just telling Caleb how brave you are, living in the city all by yourself. I could never handle that kind of uncertainty." Uncertainty. As if my life was a daily struggle against chaos rather than a carefully orchestrated business operation generating more monthly income than Caleb's annual salary. "It's not so bad," I replied, accepting the plate of food Caleb handed me. "You learn to make do with less." "That's what I admire about you," he said, and I could hear the patronizing edge that had been there since we were children. "You've always been able to find the silver lining in difficult situations. Not everyone could handle living paycheck to paycheck with such grace." Paycheck to paycheck. If only he knew that my last paycheck was a quarterly distribution of $347,000 from my real estate holdings. Aunt Joyce arrived with her own contribution to the morning's doom and gloom, a real estate agent friend who'd done a market analysis of the property. Barbara Fleming was the kind of woman who wore her success like expensive jewelry, with perfectly styled hair and the confident smile of someone who'd never had a listing fail to sell. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news," Barbara announced to the assembled family, "but the market analysis confirms what we all suspected. In its current condition, you're looking at maybe $2.2 million, and that's only if you can find a buyer willing to take on a major renovation project." "What about after the repairs?" Mom asked hopefully. "Oh, completely different story then. With proper restoration, this property could easily sell for $4.5 to $5 million. It's the location, the historical significance, the acreage. But that's assuming you can find the capital for the renovation, which, let's be honest, is a significant challenge." Caleb leaned against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone who'd been proven right about everything. Which brings us back to the original problem. We need to sell as is and move on. Trying to hold on to something we can't afford to maintain is just prolonging the inevitable. "It's not just about the money," Dad said quietly. "This house has been in our family for over a century. Your great-great-grandfather built the foundation with his own hands." "And it's a beautiful foundation," Caleb replied with practiced patience. "But sentiment doesn't pay for structural repairs. Sometimes you have to make hard choices based on reality rather than emotion." That's when I decided to make my move. "What if someone in the family could afford the repairs?" I asked innocently. Caleb's laugh was exactly what I'd expected. Not malicious, but dismissive in a way that suggested the question itself was absurd. "Zoe, we've been through this. None of us has that kind of liquid capital sitting around. I mean, I'm doing well, but not spend $1 million on house repairs well." "I wasn't talking about you," I said quietly. The kitchen went silent except for the sound of coffee percolating and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Every face turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. "Sweetie, what are you saying?" I took a deep breath, knowing that the next words out of my mouth would change everything. "I'm saying I could buy the house today, cash, and handle all the repairs." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat.
The laughter started with Caleb, of course. It began as a chuckle, the kind you might make when a child suggests they could fly to the moon, then built into full-blown laughter that echoed off the kitchen's high ceilings. Within seconds, it had infected the room like a contagious disease. Uncle Frank was shaking his head with an indulgent smile. Cousin Daniel was grinning like he'd just heard the world's best joke, and even Barbara, the real estate agent, was struggling to hide her amusement behind her coffee cup. "Oh, Zoe," Caleb said, wiping tears from his eyes. "I needed that laugh. Thank you. The stress of this whole situation has been killing me, and you just reminded me why I love your optimism." Optimism, as if my offer was some charming delusion rather than a statement of financial fact. "Sweetheart," Mom said gently, her voice carrying the particular tone mothers use when they're trying to let their children down easy. "I know you want to help, and that means the world to us. But we're talking about almost $3 million. That's not the kind of money people our age have, let alone someone just starting out in life." "Besides," Meredith added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "don't you have student loans to worry about? I remember you mentioning how tight money was when you were in school." I had never mentioned money being tight, but I'd learned years ago that people heard what they expected to hear, especially when it confirmed their existing beliefs about your circumstances. "I'm serious," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I can write a check today for the full purchase price plus renovation costs." The laughter died abruptly, replaced by the kind of uncomfortable silence that follows when someone continues a joke past the point where it's funny. Caleb's expression shifted from amusement to concern, the way you might look at a family member who'd started exhibiting signs of a mental health crisis. Zoe, Caleb said, carrying the forced patience of someone trying to talk a person off a ledge. I think maybe you're confused about how much money we're actually talking about here. This isn't like buying a car or even a small condo. We're discussing millions of dollars. I understand the numbers perfectly. Dad cleared his throat, probably trying to find a diplomatic way to address what everyone clearly thought was evidence of my complete disconnect from reality. Honey, I know you've been working hard, and I'm proud of whatever success you've had with your consulting work, but even if you've saved every penny you've earned since college, we're talking about more money than most people see in a lifetime. The consulting work. The family's polite fiction for whatever mysterious activities funded my modest lifestyle. They'd never asked for specifics, and I'd never volunteered them, allowing them to imagine I scraped together a living through some combination of freelance writing, tutoring, and general hustling. Barbara Fleming leaned forward with the professional interest of someone who'd spent decades dealing with people who overestimated their financial capabilities. Zoe, I appreciate your enthusiasm, I really do. But securing financing for a property this size, especially with the renovation costs involved, requires extensive documentation of income, assets, and creditworthiness. The approval process alone can take months. I wouldn't need financing, I replied. I said cash. The room temperature seemed to drop about 10 degrees. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by genuine concern. These people loved me, in their way, and watching a family member display what appeared to be serious delusions about their financial situation wasn't funny anymore. It was troubling. Zoe, Caleb said, his voice carrying the forced patience of someone trying to talk a person off a ledge. I think maybe you're having some kind of episode. The stress of the family situation, maybe some pressure at work. Sometimes when people are under a lot of stress, they can develop unrealistic beliefs about their capabilities. An episode? He thought I was having a psychological breakdown. Why don't we call Dr. Harrison? Mom suggested, referring to our longtime family physician. Maybe he could recommend someone who specializes in, I don't need a psychiatrist, I interrupted. I need you to listen to what I'm actually saying instead of deciding it's impossible because it doesn't fit your understanding of who I am. Then help us understand, Dad said, sitting down at the kitchen table with the careful movements of someone approaching a dangerous animal. Explain to us how a young woman who's been working freelance jobs and living in a studio apartment could possibly have access to millions of dollars in cash.
This was it, the moment I'd been building toward for 8 years, the culmination of every dismissive comment, every concerned suggestion, every gentle attempt to help me face reality. They wanted an explanation? They were about to get one that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about their struggling daughter. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the contact I'd programmed under a fake name to maintain my cover. Sterling, it's Zoe. I need you to bring the documents we discussed. Yes, all of them. I'm at the family house. The conversation that followed was brief but professional, the kind of exchange between client and counsel that happens when significant legal matters need immediate attention. When I hung up, every person in the kitchen was staring at me like I'd just spoken in ancient Greek. Who was that? Caleb asked. My lawyer. He's bringing the deed. What deed? The deed to this house, the one that shows I purchased it Wednesday morning for $2.9 million cash through Blackstone Property Holdings, LLC. The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses. This wasn't the quiet of people processing a joke or trying to be gentle with someone they thought was delusional. This was the silence of people whose entire understanding of reality had just been challenged. Barbara Fleming was the first to find her voice. That's impossible. This property wasn't even officially listed. The family was still deciding whether to sell. The development company that held the mortgage was willing to negotiate. Sometimes the best deals happen before properties hit the public market. You're saying you bought our house? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. I'm saying I bought the house to keep it in the family. The mortgage holder was planning to foreclose next month and sell to developers who wanted to tear it down for condominiums. I made them an offer they couldn't refuse. Caleb was shaking his head like someone trying to clear water from his ears. This is insane. You can't just. You don't have. How could you possibly have almost $3 million in cash? The same way I've had money for everything else for the past 8 years. I own things, lots of things, things that generate income, things that appreciate in value, things that give me the kind of financial freedom you've spent your entire career trying to achieve. The sound of tires on gravel drifted through the kitchen window. Sterling's black Mercedes was pulling into the driveway, followed by a second car I didn't recognize. My lawyer never traveled alone to important meetings. That would be my legal team, I said, standing up and smoothing my thrift store sweater. They're bringing the documentation that proves everything I've just told you. I walked toward the front door, leaving my family sitting in stunned silence around the kitchen table. Behind me, I could hear the beginning of frantic whispered conversations, but I didn't turn around. After 8 years of careful performance, the final act was about to begin. Sterling stepped out of his car carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He was followed by 2 associates and a woman I recognized as the notary who'd handled the closing. All of them moved with the efficient precision of people accustomed to dealing with significant financial transactions. Ms. Blake, are you ready to make some revelations? Sterling said with a slight smile. I looked back at the house where 4 generations of my family had lived, laughed, and built memories. In a few minutes, they would understand that their struggling daughter had just saved their ancestral home. They would also understand that everything they thought they knew about me was a carefully constructed lie. I've been ready for 8 years, I said. Let's show them the deed.
Walking back into that kitchen with Sterling and his legal team felt like leading a parade that only I knew was coming. My family was exactly where I'd left them, frozen around the table like actors waiting for their cue. The whispered conversations stopped the moment Sterling entered the room, his presence immediately commanding the kind of attention that expensive suits and professional confidence tend to generate. "Good morning," Sterling said with the practiced charm of someone who'd spent decades delivering life-changing news to people who weren't prepared to hear it. "I'm James Sterling, Miss Blake's attorney. I understand there are some questions about property ownership that we can help clarify." Caleb stood up slowly, like someone emerging from deep water. "I'm sorry, but there's been some kind of misunderstanding. My sister doesn't. She can't possibly. What exactly are you here to clarify?" Sterling glanced at me with raised eyebrows, a silent question about how much I wanted him to reveal. I nodded toward the briefcase. "Everything," I said simply. He opened the leather case with the ceremonial precision of someone unveiling a work of art, removing a thick stack of documents bound in legal blue backing. The deed to the Winters family estate, along with title insurance, purchase agreements, and closing statements that would rewrite my family's entire understanding of reality. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced, "I present the warranty deed for the property located at 1247 Ocean View Drive, showing ownership transfer to Blackstone Property Holdings LLC, effective Wednesday, October 18th, purchase price $2,900,000, paid in full at closing." He placed the document on the kitchen table, like evidence in a trial, which, in a way, it was. Everyone leaned forward simultaneously, as if drawn by gravity towards something that couldn't possibly be real, but was somehow sitting right in front of them. Dad was the first to reach for it, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted the official document. His eyes moved across the page with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle in a foreign language. When he reached the signature section, his face went completely white. "Zoe Blake? President, Blackstone Property Holdings LLC," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's impossible," Caleb said, but his voice had lost all its earlier confidence.
He grabbed the deed from Dad's hands, studying it like a detective examining evidence that contradicted everything he thought he knew about a case. This has to be fake, some kind of elaborate prank. Sterling's associate, a sharp-faced woman named Vaughn, stepped forward with additional documentation. Here's the title insurance policy, the closing statement showing wire transfer of funds, and the certificate of good standing for Blackstone Property Holdings LLC files with the Secretary of State in 2019. The year I'd incorporated my first shell company to maintain anonymity while purchasing larger properties. My family was getting a real-time education in how serious real estate investors structured their operations. Mom had gone completely silent, staring at the documents like they were written in hieroglyphics. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the hollow quality of someone whose world had just been turned upside down. I don't understand. How is this possible? How could you afford? Where did the money come from? Real estate investment, I replied, as if that simple phrase could explain 8 years of careful planning, strategic acquisitions, and compound growth. Built to what? Uncle Frank asked, probably trying to calculate how someone could go from struggling student to multi-million-dollar property owner without anyone noticing. Sterling consulted his notes with professional efficiency. As of this morning, Miss Blake's portfolio consists of 47 income-producing properties across 3 states with a combined value of approximately $28 million and monthly gross income of $184,000. The number hit the room like a physical force. I watched my family's faces cycle through emotions I'd never seen before. Shock, disbelief, something that might have been awe, and in Caleb's case, something that looks suspiciously like anger. $184,000 a month? Meredith's voice cracked on the last word. That's more than Caleb makes in a year. Caleb's face had gone through several color changes, finally settling on a shade of red that suggested his blood pressure was approaching dangerous levels. This is insane, absolutely insane. You're telling me that my sister, who I've been worried about for years, who shows up to family dinners looking like she shops at garage sales, is secretly some kind of real estate mogul? Not secretly anymore.
Barbara Fleming, who'd been studying the documents with the professional interest of someone in the business, looked up with genuine amazement. These properties, I recognize some of these addresses. The Harborview Apartments, the Riverside Office Complex, these are significant holdings, institutional quality investments. You own Harborview? Cousin Daniel asked, incredulously. I looked at renting an apartment there last year. The waiting list was 6 months long. 8 months now, I corrected. Demand has been increasing steadily. The revelation was spreading through the room like ripples in a pond. Each new piece of information forcing them to recalibrate their understanding of who I was and what my life actually looked like. The struggling sister narrative was crumbling in real time, replaced with something none of them had imagined possible. But why? Dad's question came out as barely more than a whisper. Why hide all this? Why let us worry about you for years when you had more money than the rest of you combined? I finished. Because every time I tried to tell you about my success, you dismissed it as fantasy. Remember the Henderson house? Remember spring break of my junior year when I tried to explain what I was building and Caleb told me I was going to crash and burn? The color drained from Caleb's face as the memory hit him. That dinner 8 years ago when he'd predicted my failure with such certainty, when he'd accused me of future financial dependency on the family. You said I'd come crying to the family for bailout money, I continued. You said I had no business experience, no concept of risk management, no understanding of real money. You said I should stick to safe jobs with steady paychecks and leave business decisions to people who actually knew what they were doing. The kitchen had gone completely silent except for the ticking of that grandfather clock, marking seconds in a conversation that was rewriting years of family history. So I decided to prove you wrong. All of you. I decided to build something so successful, so undeniably profitable, that even you couldn't dismiss it as luck or delusion. And I decided to do it without asking for your help, your advice, or your approval. Sterling cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should discuss the practical implications of the property transfer. Miss Blake has asked me to prepare documents that would allow the family to continue living in the house while she handles all maintenance, taxes, and improvement costs. You'd let us stay? Mom asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. It's your family home. I didn't buy it to kick you out. I bought it to make sure you'd never have to leave. The emotions in the room were shifting again, from shock to something approaching gratitude. But Caleb wasn't ready to let go of his anger. This is all very generous, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. But I still don't understand why you felt the need to lie to us for 8 years. To let us worry about you, offer you help you clearly didn't need, treat you like a failure? I suggested. Like someone who couldn't manage her own life? Like a child who needed constant guidance and protection from her own poor decisions? The truth of it hung in the air between us, undeniable and uncomfortable. They had treated me exactly like that, and we all knew it. Now they were going to have to figure out how to treat me like the successful businesswoman I'd actually been all along.
The legal team left an hour later, after ensuring that all documentation was properly filed and understood. The transfer of ownership was complete, the family's residency rights were secured, and the renovation budget was approved. But the emotional aftermath was just beginning. As Sterling's Mercedes disappeared down the driveway, I found myself alone in the library with Dad, who'd been unusually quiet since the deed revelation. He sat in his favorite leather chair, the one he'd occupied during countless Sunday afternoons reading newspapers and solving crossword puzzles. But now he looked like a man trying to navigate completely unfamiliar territory. 47 properties, he said finally, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and something that might have been regret. $28 million, and we never knew. I needed you not to know, I replied, settling into the chair across from him. Your reactions today proved why. Even with illegal documents in front of you, your first instinct was to assume it was impossible. He nodded slowly, processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. I failed you, didn't I? As a father, I mean. I should have seen what you were capable of, should have supported your ambitions instead of dismissing them. The admission hit harder than I'd expected. Dad had never been the one pushing me toward conventional success. That had been Mom and Caleb, but he'd never defended my unconventional choices either. You taught me to work hard and be honest. Those lessons made everything else possible. But I didn't teach you that you could trust your family with the truth about your success. That's on me, Zoe. I should have created an environment where you felt safe sharing your achievements instead of hiding them. Before I could respond, Mom appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying, but her posture suggested she'd reached some kind of decision during the past hour. Can we talk, just us? She asked. Dad excused himself with the understanding that some conversations needed to happen between mothers and daughters. Mom closed the library door behind him and took the seat he'd vacated, her movements careful and deliberate. I owe you an apology, she began without preamble. A massive one. I spent 8 years treating you like a child who couldn't manage her own life, offering unsolicited advice and gentle corrections when you were actually more successful than anyone in this family. Mom, no, let me finish. I need to say this. She took a shaky breath, composing herself with the same grace she'd used to handle difficult parents during her teaching career. I measured your worth by my standards, instead of recognizing that you were building something I couldn't even comprehend. I worried about your finances while you were creating generational wealth. I fretted about your future while you were securing not just your own future, but ours as well. The pain in her voice was genuine, and it forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. My family's dismissal had hurt them too. They'd spent years genuinely worried about someone they loved, not knowing that their concern was not only unnecessary, but unwelcome. The hardest part, she continued, is realizing that my brilliant daughter felt like she had to hide her success from the people who should have been celebrating it. What does that say about the kind of family we created? It says you loved me enough to worry, even when that worry was misplaced.
Love isn't supposed to be condescending, Zoe. Love is supposed to be supportive, encouraging, proud. I spent so many years being proud of Caleb's conventional achievements while completely missing your extraordinary ones. The conversation was interrupted by raised voices from the kitchen. Caleb's voice, specifically, carrying the particular edge it got when he was losing an argument he expected to win. "This is insane," he was saying to his wife. "Absolutely insane. My little sister is worth more than everyone I know combined, and she's been letting me offer her financial advice for years. Do you know how humiliating this is?" "Humiliating for who?" I asked from the doorway. He spun around to face me, and I could see something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. Not of me, but of what my success meant for his position in the family hierarchy. "For humiliating. For me, obviously. Do you have any idea what it's like to discover that someone you've been patronizing for years could buy and sell you without blinking? That every piece of financial wisdom I've shared, every offer of help, every concern about your future was completely misplaced?"
"Now you know how it felt to be dismissed and underestimated for 8 years," I replied calmly. "That's not the same thing, isn't it? You spent years assuming I was financially irresponsible because I didn't broadcast my success. You measured my worth by your understanding of what success should look like. You offered me help I didn't need while dismissing achievements you couldn't imagine." Meredith was watching our exchange like someone observing a tennis match, her head turning back and forth between us. "Caleb," she said finally, "maybe you should listen to what Zoe is actually saying instead of focusing on how this affects you." "How this affects me?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My entire understanding of my family, my place in it, my role as the successful older brother, all of that just got turned upside down. So yes, I'm focused on how this affects me. "Your role as the successful older brother," I repeated. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not my deception, not the family's financial security, but the fact that your position as the golden child just got challenged." The accusation hit home. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched. For his entire adult life, Caleb had been the family success story, the one everyone looked to for financial wisdom and business acumen. My revelation didn't just make him look foolish, it dethroned him. "You could have told me," he said quietly. "You could have trusted me with the truth." "When? When you laughed at my idea to buy the Henderson house? When you predicted I'd crash and burn during spring break? When you told me to leave business decisions to people who actually knew what they were doing? When exactly should I have trusted you with the truth about my success?" The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Uncle Frank and Cousin Daniel talking in low voices on the back porch. Through the window, I could see them gesturing animatedly, probably trying to process their own shock at the morning's revelations. "Caleb," she said finally, "maybe you should listen to what Zoe is actually saying instead of focusing on how this affects you." "How this affects me?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My entire understanding of my family, my place in it, my role as the successful older brother, all of that just got turned upside down. So yes, I'm focused on how this affects me. "Your role as the successful older brother," I repeated. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not my deception, not the family's financial security, but the fact that your position as the golden child just got challenged." The accusation hit home. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched. For his entire adult life, Caleb had been the family's success story, the one everyone looked to for financial wisdom and business acumen. My revelation didn't just make him look foolish, it dethroned him. "You could have told me," he said quietly. "You could have trusted me with the truth." "When? When you laughed at my idea to buy the Henderson house? When you predicted I'd crash and burn during spring break? When you told me to leave business decisions to people who actually knew what they were doing? When exactly should I have trusted you with the truth about my success?" The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Uncle Frank and Cousin Daniel talking in low voices on the back porch. Through the window, I could see them gesturing animatedly, probably trying to process their own shock at the morning's revelations. "I was trying to protect you," Caleb said finally. "You were trying to control me," I corrected. "There's a difference.
Meredith stepped between us with the diplomatic skills of someone who'd spent years managing family dynamics. Maybe we should all take some time to process this. It's been a big morning for everyone. There's something else, I said, knowing that if I was going to reveal everything, I might as well finish the job. Caleb, that office building where your marketing firm rents space, the one with the parking garage that's always full and the lobby with the expensive art, I own that too. The color drained from his face so quickly, I thought he might faint. You're my landlord? Technically, Riverside Holdings LLC is your landlord, but yes. The irony was perfect, and I could see him calculating how many months he'd been writing rent checks that ultimately ended up in my bank account, how many times he'd complained about the building management, or suggested they should negotiate better lease terms, never knowing he was talking about his sister's property. For how long? 3 years. I bought it right after your firm signed the 5-year lease. He sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, finally understanding the full scope of what had been hidden from him. Not just my success, but my success that directly intersected with his daily life. What else don't I know? He asked weakly. I smiled, but there was no cruelty in it. The anger I had carried for 8 years was finally dissipating, replaced by something that felt surprisingly like relief. That's all the major revelations for today. But Caleb, the next time someone in this family has an idea that sounds impossible, maybe consider the possibility that they know something you don't.
The afternoon stretched into evening as my family gradually came to terms with their new reality. Uncle Frank and Aunt Joyce had joined the extended conversation, along with cousin Daniel, who'd driven over after hearing fragmented details from someone's frantic phone call. The family estate's living room had become an impromptu therapy session, with everyone trying to process how dramatically their understanding of everything had changed. I need to understand the timeline, Uncle Frank said, consulting notes he'd been taking like a detective investigating a crime scene. You started with 1 duplex in college, and now you own 47 properties worth $28 million. That's not just success, that's extraordinary success. How did you scale so quickly? I'd been dreading this question because the answer revealed just how methodically I'd been building my empire while they thought I was struggling to pay rent. Compound growth, I explained. Every property I bought generated rental income that I reinvested into additional properties. Instead of spending the profits on lifestyle improvements, I lived modestly and used every dollar for acquisitions. After the first 5 properties, the cash flow was sufficient to purchase new properties every 6 to 8 months. Without bank financing? Barbara Fleming asked. She'd stayed for the extended conversation, probably recognizing that she was witnessing something unprecedented in her decades of real estate experience. Creative financing, private lending, seller carrybacks, lease options, there are dozens of ways to acquire property without traditional mortgages. Banks actually slow down the process when you're moving quickly and have other funding sources. Cousin Daniel, who worked in finance himself, leaned forward with professional interest. What kind of returns are you generating? The portfolio averages about 18% annual return when you factor in cash flow, appreciation, and tax benefits. Some properties perform better, obviously. The student housing near universities typically yields 25 to 30% annually. 30%? Daniel's voice cracked slightly. That's institutional level performance. Better than institutional level, I corrected. Institutions have overhead, management fees, and bureaucracy that reduce their effective returns. When you're investing your own capital and managing your own properties, you can optimize for maximum performance. Mom was shaking her head in amazement. All those times you came to family dinners and let us worry about your finances, you were probably making more money that week than most of us make in a month. It was true, though I'd never calculated it quite that way. During peak acquisition periods, the combination of rental income, property appreciation, and new deal profits often exceeded $50,000 a month. Meanwhile, my family fretted about whether I could afford groceries. What I still don't understand is why you continued the charade after you'd clearly succeeded. After the first million, after the 5th million, why keep pretending to struggle? The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding all day, the psychological complexity of what I'd done. It wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore, it had become a form of protection.
Because wealth changes how people treat you, and not always in good ways. When people know you have money, every interaction becomes transactional. Every family gathering includes requests for loans or investments. Every relationship gets complicated by questions about whether people like you for yourself or for what you can provide. I looked around the room at faces I'd known my entire life, wondering if their current attention was genuine interest or newfangled respect based on my net worth. Besides, I continued, you all seemed so committed to your narrative about my life that contradicting it felt like swimming upstream. It was easier to let you think what you wanted to think while I built what I wanted to build. Caleb had been unusually quiet during this extended conversation, but now he looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. There's something I need to ask you, and I need you to be honest with me. I've been honest about everything else today. Have you been helping the family financially? Secretly, I mean. Because looking back at the last few years, there were times when things worked out a little too conveniently. The question hung in the air like smoke. I'd wondered when someone would connect those dots. What do you mean? Mom asked. Caleb's face was cycling through memories, probably examining past events with new perspective. Remember when Dad's hardware store was struggling 3 years ago? That anonymous investor who bought a 20% stake and never asked for any involvement in operations?
Dad's face went white. That was you? Blackstone Holdings, LLC, I confirmed. I couldn't let you lose the business that's been in our family for 30 years. And the scholarship fund at Mom's school? Caleb continued, his voice gaining momentum as the pieces fell into place. The one that appeared right when the district was cutting arts programs? The children needed music and art classes, I said simply. Mom's hand went to her mouth. The Linda Winters Arts Education Fund? You named it after me? You spent 37 years teaching kids to love learning. It seemed like an appropriate tribute. The revelations were cascading now as family members began re-examining years of fortunate coincidences with new understanding. Uncle Frank's medical bills, Aunt Joyce said suddenly. When he had the heart attack and the insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatment, someone paid the entire $100,000 bill anonymously. Uncle Frank was staring at me with an expression somewhere between gratitude and shock. You probably saved my life. The treatment had a 93% success rate. It was a good investment. Investment, Caleb repeated quietly. You've been treating our family's problems like a portfolio to manage. There was criticism in his voice, but also something that might have been admiration. He was beginning to understand that my financial success hadn't made me selfish. It had made me more generous than anyone realized. But why secretly? Dad asked. Why not tell us you were helping? Because you wouldn't have accepted help from your struggling daughter. Your pride would have made you refuse assistance from someone you thought needed assistance herself. The anonymity allowed you to accept help while preserving your dignity. Barbara Fleming was taking notes now, probably recognizing that she was witnessing something that belonged in a business school case study. This is remarkable. You've essentially been operating as a family investment fund while maintaining complete anonymity. How much? Mom asked quietly. How much have you spent helping us over the years? I did the mental calculation quickly. About $400,000 in direct assistance, plus another $200,000 in business investments that benefited family members. The number settled over the room like a blanket. $600,000 in secret family support, provided by the daughter they'd been worrying about for 8 years. We owe you everything, Uncle Frank said, his voice thick with emotion. You don't owe me anything. You're my family. Taking care of each other is what families do. But we weren't taking care of you, Caleb said, and for the first time all day, his voice carried genuine remorse instead of defensiveness. We were patronizing you while you were protecting all of us. The admission hung in the air, forcing everyone to confront an uncomfortable truth. While they'd been treating me like the family member who needed guidance and support, I had actually been the one providing both. As the sun began to set through the living room windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, I realized that the performance was finally completely over. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more carefully managed deceptions. Tomorrow, I would wake up as myself, all of myself, for the first time in 8 years. The question now was whether my family could handle the truth of who I'd become, and whether I could handle being seen clearly after so many years in the shadows.
1 year later, I walked through the renovated family estate with an architect, reviewing the final details of the restoration that had transformed our ancestral home into something even more magnificent than our great-great-grandfather could have imagined. The foundation issues were long resolved, the electrical system was state-of-the-art, and the entire structure had been reinforced to last another century. But the real transformation wasn't in the building. It was in the family that lived within it. The home theater should be finished next week, the architect was saying, consulting his tablet as we walked through what used to be the old servants' quarters. And the wine cellar installation is scheduled for Friday. I nodded, but my attention was focused on the voices drifting from the kitchen where Mom was hosting her weekly cooking class for local seniors, a program funded by the Linda Winters Community Education Foundation, which had grown far beyond its original scope to include everything from computer literacy to financial planning. The changes in our family dynamics had been gradual but profound. The immediate aftermath of the revelation had been chaotic, with everyone struggling to recalibrate their understanding of our relationships. But as the months passed, something beautiful had emerged from the confusion, authentic connections based on truth rather than assumptions. Dad had thrown himself into learning about real estate investment with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new hobby. He'd become my unofficial research assistant, analyzing potential acquisitions and helping identify emerging markets. His hardware store background had proven surprisingly valuable when evaluating properties for renovation potential. Zoe's looking at a mixed-use development in Portland, $12 million project. My daughter's going to transform an entire neighborhood. The pride in his voice was different from the worry-tinged concern of the previous 8 years. This was genuine admiration for actual achievements rather than wishful thinking about potential future success. Mom had channeled her newfound understanding of my capabilities into expanding her educational initiatives. The foundation now operated in 6 states, and she'd become a surprisingly effective advocate for arts education funding at the state level. I spent 37 years teaching children, but my daughter taught me that there's no limit to what you can accomplish when someone believes in your vision. The most dramatic change had been in Caleb. The initial humiliation and anger had given way to something I'd never expected: respect. Not the patronizing kind he'd shown before, but genuine professional respect between equals. He'd approached me 6 months after the revelation with a business proposal that surprised both of us. "I want to learn," he'd said, sitting across from me in my office, the penthouse space I'd finally shown him after years of hiding. "Not as your older brother who thinks he knows better, but as someone who recognizes that you've mastered something I don't understand." I'd started him small, with a single duplex acquisition that he could manage while maintaining his marketing career. The property had performed exactly as projected, generating steady cash flow and appreciating in value. More importantly, it had given him first-hand experience with the strategies I'd been using for years. "I understand now why you didn't tell us," he'd said during one of our monthly property review meetings. "Not just because we wouldn't have believed you, but because we wouldn't have been able to see you clearly. We were so invested in our version of who you were that we couldn't accept evidence that contradicted it." The admission had marked a turning point in our relationship. For the first time in our adult lives, we were interacting as peers rather than older brother and struggling younger sister. Even our extended family relationships had evolved. Uncle Frank had become my most enthusiastic supporter, introducing me to everyone as my niece, the real estate genius. Cousin Daniel had started his own small investment portfolio using principles I taught him. Aunt Joyce had joined the foundation board and discovered a talent for grant writing that had helped secure millions in additional funding. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I saw myself. For 8 years, I'd lived a double life, maintaining a carefully constructed facade while building my empire in secret. The revelation had forced me to integrate those two versions of myself, the struggling young woman my family had worried about, and the successful entrepreneur I'd actually become.
Living authentically turned out to be more liberating than I'd imagined. No more careful outfit choices to maintain my cover. No more deflecting questions about my work or finances. No more pretending that offers of help were necessary rather than condescending. I'd moved into the estate's renovated carriage house, a beautiful space that allowed me to be close to family while maintaining my independence. My real car, a Tesla Model S that I'd owned for 3 years but never driven to family gatherings, was parked openly in the driveway next to Dad's pickup truck and Mom's sedan. The business had continued to grow, of course. The Portland development Caleb had mentioned was moving forward on schedule, and I'd recently closed on a retail complex in Austin that would add another $47,000 to my monthly income. But success felt different now that it wasn't secret. Achievements were more satisfying when they could be shared and celebrated rather than hidden. My phone buzzed with a text from Barbara Fleming, who'd become both a business partner and friend in the years since the revelation. The Nashville project just got final approval. Closing is set for next month. This is going to be your biggest success yet. The Nashville project, a $23 million mixed-use development that would combine affordable housing with commercial space, represented everything I'd learned about building wealth while creating positive community impact. It was ambitious enough to challenge me professionally while meaningful enough to matter beyond profit margins. As I walked back toward the main house, I could see Mom through the kitchen window, laughing with her students as they attempted some complicated recipe. Dad was in his workshop, probably building something that would solve a problem no one else had noticed. Caleb's car was pulling into the driveway for our weekly property review meeting, and I could see Meredith in the passenger seat coming to join us for dinner afterward. This was what I'd been working toward all along, though I hadn't fully understood it at the time. Not just financial success, but the freedom to be completely myself with the people I loved. The power to solve problems not just for my own benefit, but for my family and community. The respect that comes from actual achievement rather than careful performance. That evening, as we sat around the dining room table where I endured years of gentle condescension disguised as concern, I realized that the most valuable thing I'd built wasn't my real estate empire or my investment portfolio. It was the bridge between who I'd been forced to pretend to be and who I'd actually become. My brother had laughed when I said I'd buy the house. Now he knew that when I make a promise, I have the resources and determination to keep it. The deed was just paper. The real ownership of my life, my choices, and my relationships had taken much longer to establish. But it was worth every year of careful planning and patient execution to finally be seen clearly by the people who mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.